Tom Mullen here with Communities at Washington Times, and today my guest is Peter Schiff. He's the president of Euro-Pacific Capital, a best-selling author, frequent guest on nationally televised financial shows, and also the host of the Peter Schiff radio show. So, Peter, thanks for joining me today.
Tom, thanks for having me on with you.
Now, you've got two sets of followers. You've got the smaller group who are your clients, who like your what you can do for them in investments because of your economic outlook, and you've got a whole bunch of Ron Paul supporters who just like what you say about politics and economics in general. Isn't that right?
Well, some of them do overlap. I have clients that are also big Ron Paul supporters, and I've run into quite a few of them actually here at this convention. But yes, I mean, you can kind of divide the people that follow me into two camps, although they do sometimes overlap. You've got people who are looking for investment advice. They tend to be older because it takes a while to accumulate funds that you wish to invest. So they're generally older people, and they're seeking me out for my financial services. And then you have a lot of younger people who found me on the internet, see me on television, that don't necessarily use my brokerage services, but follow me because they believe in what I'm saying. And of course, it's the same message. I put out the same message looking for both investors and trying to influence politics and the way people think. And so I'm basically casting this net out, and I get two types of fish that tend to be caught up in it.
Now, you're known best for having predicted not only the housing crisis back in 2008, but the much deeper recession that you said was going to go along with it. In fact, you wrote a book about it in 2006, isn't that right?
Right. The book came out in February of 2007, Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. And in that book, I did outline the fact that we were living within a housing bubble, that we had a phony recovery from the 2001 recession. The result was going to be a huge recession that would follow the bursting of that housing bubble. I explained how the housing bubble was a creature of both the Federal Reserve and Fannie and Freddie, that it wasn't a flaw of capitalism, but a flaw of government interference in capitalism. I knew how exposed the banks were to the bad mortgage loans that I saw coming. I knew how much of our phony economic growth was a function of housing-related wealth, home equity extractions, spending, and I knew that when the bubble burst, we would have a huge recession, banks would fail, deficits would soar. I predicted trillion-dollar deficits long before we had our first one. But if you actually go back to my book, that recession was not the economic collapse that I was actually referring to in the title. That collapse is the one that's coming up soon, because what I wrote in my first book was that as a result of the bad recession we would have after the housing bubble burst, the government would repeat all the mistakes that caused that bubble. They would bail out, they would stimulate, we would have QE, all this stuff would happen, and we would try to reflate the bubble. We would try to encourage more consumption, more debt, prop up the housing market, expand government, use all the Keynesian stimulus, and that was going to bring on the real crash. Because see, the bigger the artificial boom, the bigger the bust, and this is the mother of all stimulus packages. We've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at the economy, Keynesian style, and I think we're now so over-leveraged, so addicted to cheap money. The Fed thinks they have to keep interest rates at zero indefinitely, but at some point, rates are going to go up. And when they do, the party is over. We have a currency crisis, a sovereign debt crisis. If you think it's bad in Europe, wait till you see how bad it's going to be here.
Now, I remember that after your predictions came true, you were on many of the financial shows and people were complimenting you for how prescient you'd been, but saying, well, what do we do about it now? Almost as if the cause of the crash had nothing to do with the solution.
No, a lot of people are looking for more government programs to solve the problem. Unfortunately, those are the problem. And in order to let the market solve the problem, which the market can solve the problem, it's just in the short run, it's painful. Because as a result of decades of bad monetary and fiscal policy, coming from both Republicans and Democrats, right, the economy is all screwed up. We don't save enough, we don't produce enough, we borrow too much, we spend too much, government is too big, the service sector is too big, right? We have to reallocate our resources. We need capital to be able to move from services to goods production. We need consumers to stop spending and start saving again so we can have the savings to invest, to make the capital investments we need, to be more productive, to make more stuff, to create productive jobs. But the whole transition from the phony economy that we have to the real economy that we need is going to have some transitionary pain. And that is the problem, because none of the politicians want that pain on their watch, and they don't want to level with the American public and let them know that this bitter tasting medicine is what we need if we ever want a real recovery. So instead, we get stimulus, which is kind of Novocaine. It dulls the pain, but the underlying disease gets worse, and that's why we don't have a real recovery right now. That's why people are worse off, incomes are falling faster during the recovery than during the recession. And we're not creating any jobs, and we are never going to create jobs until the government gets out of the way, stops stimulating, and lets the market restructure the economy in a way that would enable jobs to be created.
You mentioned Keynesianism, and I know that both you and Ron Paul are adherents of the Austrian School of Economics. For anybody who doesn't know, that's not a couple of buildings in Austria. What is the Austrian School of Economics?
Well, it's kind of like you're asking me, what's science, or what's astronomy, because you believe in astrology. Austrian economics is economics, right? The Keynesianism is like it's like a witch doctor. It's all a bunch of nonsense. But politicians love Keynesianism because it justifies what they want to do to get elected, which is spend more money, promise something for nothing, play Santa Claus. And because so many governments or politicians have adhered to this philosophy, governments have created a lot of problems all around the world, because it's kind of like Keynesians believe that the way you put out a fire is with gasoline, right? Despite the fact that that's not how you do it, right? And so every time there's a fire, they pour gasoline on it, and now the fire doesn't go out, it gets bigger, and so they say, gee, we just didn't put enough gas on, let's pour some more. And they keep on doing it, and that's where we are right now. We're pouring gasoline on this fire. What we need is some water on the fire, and that's Austrian economics. I mean, Austrian economics, understands the business cycle, that it's not a flaw in the free market, that government creates that cycle because it artificially manipulates the price of money. It sets interest rates instead of allowing the market to discover the appropriate rate of interest. You have the Fed fixing the price of interest, the price of money, the same way the Soviet Union used to fix the price of bread. But of course they don't get it right, and because we get the price of money wrong, and because that's probably the most important price in an economy, it's half of every transaction, we create malinvestments. Right? We have capital going to the wrong sectors. We have labor going to the wrong sectors. And the economy is all out of balance, and the market keeps trying to correct the problem, and that's the recession. The recession is actually the market's way of restructuring the economy, putting the pieces back where they belong. The mistakes are made during the boom. They're corrected during the bust. The mistakes are made because of the central bank, because of the government. And then when the market tries to repair the damage, the Fed interferes and prevents them. It's like we've got a cure to the disease, but the Fed won't let us have it. Instead, we get a bigger dose of what's ailing us.
And you mentioned before, and because of just what you're saying, that the cure is worse than the disease, you've got a new book now called The Real Crash, right?
Yes, the real crash, meaning the crash that I really was referring to in my first book. But everybody thinks it's over. People will congratulate me. Hey, you really predicted the collapse. I said, well, don't congratulate me yet because it hasn't happened. I mean, I got the first part right. This is the precursor. This is like the overture, of the opera. But I mean, we haven't, really started the opera yet, let alone heard from the fat lady. So my new book is The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. And, kind of the main difference between this book and my original book is I deal with a lot of what do we do about it? Not just how we got into this mess, but I really get into the politics of what we need to do, the policies that need to be changed. And I give specific examples of here's what we need to do in this area in order to allow the market to rebuild what the government destroyed.
You're not a stranger to politics. You actually ran for the U.S. Senate back in 2010, and a lot like Ron Paul, you were up against the establishment, big money, and that Keynesian economic theory that seems to dominate, correct?
Yeah, well, I was up against a combination of the establishment and big money. And my opponent, Linda McMahon, who of World Wrestling fame, she spent $30 million of her own money to beat me in the primary in a tiny state like Connecticut, right? 3 million people or so. So she spent 10 times as much money as I did. She only got twice as many votes. I didn't do that bad, but I couldn't overcome that. And of course, the media basically blacked out my campaign. I do a lot of television, yet when I ran for office, I couldn't buy my way onto TV. It was like, how there's certain words that you can't say on radio and TV? Well, when I was running for Senate, one of those words was Peter Schiff. So, there was kind of like a blackout. Nobody took me seriously, but I surprised everybody. I did a lot better than everybody thought. And we had a lot of help from the Ron Paul people. We had volunteers all around the country working for me. In fact, all around the world. I had volunteers, in Norway making phone calls for me. And fortunately, we were able to elect Rand, and because he won his Senate seat. And I think that's great. In fact, he gave the best speech at this Republican convention thus far as I'm concerned. And the only thing that saddens me is that, we don't have more of an official recognition of Ron Paul and his contribution to the Republican Party as far as bringing in new members, a lot of young people where, the Democrats were eating our lunch. It's very easy, it's very seductive for a young person who's never really had a job, never worked in the economy, to believe the liberal myth. But now Ron Paul succeeded where all other Republicans had failed. He brought this messages to college campuses, and we've got a lot of young people who could be Republicans for a long time if the Republican Party embraces them and acknowledges their contributions and their efforts and continues this process. And I think they do a little bit of a disservice when what they really want to do is, just court the 55 and over vote by, proclaiming your allegiance to Medicare and the fact that you want to fight to make sure that Medicare is never cut and that all these promises are kept. Because when you do that, you're basically telling the young people that we're just going to enslave you, that you're going to have to pay confiscatory levels of taxation for your entire life so that we can keep promises that you never had a part of. Because if that's the choice, I think a lot of young people are going to get out of town. I mean, not leave the country, right, because they don't want to pay for somebody else's Medicare or Social Security. So I would love to see the Republican Party really embrace the generational inequalities inherent in government-run Ponzi schemes, admit these socialist experiments were a colossal failure, and instead of proclaiming, how we want to preserve them and attacking the Democrats for cutting them, let's acknowledge that they were a mistake to begin with. And unfortunately now people are dependent on government, where had we never created Social Security and Medicare, they would be self-reliant and they would have a much more secure future and they'd be able to afford health care. Now we've made them so broke that they need the government, which of course is what the government wants. The government wants to create dependency because they know they can count on the people who depend on them to vote for them. And it's very difficult now for the Republicans to embrace capitalism when it comes to these programs because they're scared to death of being shot as the bearer of a bad message. And so, we continue to make promises that we can't keep, and we keep digging this hole deeper.
Yeah. Now, Peter, in addition to running your investment firm, writing books, doing national television spots, and the occasional Senate run, you're also hosting a radio show. You're broadcasting from the RNC.
Yeah.
What's the show all about?
Well, it's about the same stuff we're talking about. It's the Peter Schiff Show. And I do it at schiffradio.com if people want to check it out. It's live from 10 a.m. to noon, Monday through Friday. And of course, if you don't want to listen live, you just go to schiffradio.com anytime and hear the show. But it's basically, I talk about three subjects mostly. I talk about the markets, and I talk about economics, and I talk about politics. And there's not that many people in the radio talk show world that can really address all three of those topics the way I can. So I think I have a very unique spin on things, and you have a lot of conservative talk radio hosts, not so many libertarian, and so that's that's my perspective. And we take calls. We have a lot of interesting guests that come on the show, and we're now syndicated through Radio America, so we're on about 50 stations. Hopefully, we'll be on a lot more stations, in the years ahead.
And what's the best website for someone looking to learn more about all the above about Peter Schiff? Which one do we send them to?
I got so many websites. I mean, my brokerage firm, Euro Pacific Capital, is europac.net. And I think it's very important to understand that the next crisis is going to be centered on the dollar. Investors are going to lose a fortune in this crisis, much more than was lost during the downturn in 2008. Even people in bonds, I believe, are going to get crushed. So people need to protect themselves, and we help people do that with foreign stocks, precious metals, foreign currencies. So you can learn about that at europac.net. Again, the radio show is schiffradio.com. I've got a precious metals company for those of you who want physical precious metals, schiffgold.com. Just go there and you can learn about my metals company. I got a Facebook page that people go to, YouTube channel. There's lots of information on the internet for people that want to spend some time, studying up on Peter Schiff.
Yeah, you're not hard to find anymore.
And of course, pick up any one of my books. I got about 5.
Right.
But the brand new one is the one you might want to start with, since it's the most recent. We mentioned the real crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy.
Well, Peter, thank you for being with me today, and best of luck in everything you've taken on.
Oh, sure. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's Peter Schiff, president of Euro Pacific Capital, and best-selling author, host of the Peter Schiff radio show. This is Tom Mullen from Communities at Washington Times. Thanks for watching.